So, do you guys have any chance to try any of the questions this week?
Of course not.
Do you remember what the 2 questions are that we learned so much?
What do you mean by that?
What do you mean by that?
How did you get to
And
that?
how did you come to that conclusion? So, this week will be a little bit of a shift from what really is more like defensive questions. You're just kind of leading them down the path. He's going to show us how to be a little more offensive with questions, where it's just leading people in a direction you want them to go with questions, which is a little more complicated. It's a little, you have to know where you're trying to go.
Yes.
So he's got a lot of real world examples. So we may not get through this whole session today. We'll just, those are too much fun. So we'll just go as far as we can go. At 3:30, we'll stop and we'll pick it up next week wherever we left off. So we'll probably get out of sequence with the videos, but I think that's okay. The examples are actually too good to rush through. Next week is going to be a lot of them. So we'll probably take at least 2 weeks on next week's. So, okay. So this is the third in the Columbos. This is session 3. And being able to give clear answers to these questions demonstrates your mastery of the information. So if you have a chance and you go through the interactive questions, it just kind of rehashes what the last 2 sessions were. So we're going to listen to Greg, and then we'll go through his kind of highlights that he wants to kind of stress in the study guide. Go ahead.
Hi, Greg Hochul here with Stand to Reason, and this is our 3rd session together, learning the tactical approach. I hope that you had a good time in the last couple of weeks, maybe, taking some of the stuff that we've learned and talked about and putting it into play and getting comfortable with it. Let's take a moment and talk about what we discussed last session. Last session, I introduced you to the second use of the Columbo tactic. That would be the second step in our game plan, and I call that reversing the burden of proof. Remember the rule that we talked about: the one who makes the claim bears the burden, which means we're not going to let the other side have any free rides. We're not going to let them get away with just making assertions, okay? We want the rationale. The next thing that I taught you was to avoid a kind of a trap. I called it the professor's ploy, in which the burden of proof is reversed upon you when you didn't make the claim. And I told you, don't ever allow someone else to make you disprove his or her view. It's their job to defend their own view with their own reasons and evidence first before you have to step up. Okay? And I told you also what to do when you didn't know what to do. This whole approach, our game plan, is a relaxed game plan. It's a don't push it game plan. It's a gardening game plan. So if you don't know where to go next, don't sweat it. If you don't see an opening, no big deal. Do what you can. Let the rest go. There's no need to force the conversation. The last thing that we talked about when we were together last time is I showed you how to use the Columbo tactic defensively to keep you out of the hot seat. So sometimes you're going to find yourself outmatched, somebody else that's drilling you with a lot of extra information you don't know how to handle. Go immediately into student mode. Even take notes if you have to. Invite the other person to tell you what they believe and why they believe it. Now you're the learner. You're not trying to persuade. Tell them you'll think about it, and then think about it. Work on it on your own when the pressure is off, and it's just a lot easier to do that. So that's what we talked about last time. Here's what I want to talk about in the 3rd session. I want to complete the game plan, basically. I want to teach you the 3rd step in the Columbo tactic, the 3rd use of Columbo. And that 3rd use is using questions to make a point, or using questions to lead someone somewhere. I'm going to show you, in addition to that, some very specific ways that you can improve your use of Columbo. And finally, I want to show you how to defend against the Columbo tactic when somebody else uses it with you. So let's talk for a moment about the 3rd step. We talked about the 1st step of the game plan. All you're going to worry about is gathering information. You're going to use the question, what do you mean by that? The next step, when people make a claim or an assertion, then we reverse the burden of proof on the person who's making the claim. We use the question, Now, how did you come to that conclusion or some version of that? Okay. Here's the third use of Columbo. In the first two uses, by the way, we didn't need to know anything but the questions. And that's why it's such a good game plan. In the third use of Columbo, you got to know something. If you're going to use questions to make a point, you got to know the point that you're going to make. Think of it like you have a target, and target is the point you want to make. The questions that you use are going to be arrows shooting at the target. So you have to have the target in view. Now, there are two different ways that you can use this, two different kinds of targets, I guess, is the best way to put it. You can use questions to advance your own point of view. So let's say you want to make a point. How do you do that? Use the Columbo tactic. We'll talk about how to do that. Secondly, you can use your questions to exploit a weakness or a flaw. That means you can help a person see where he or she went wrong in their thinking. Let me go back just for a moment to something I said a moment ago. In the first two uses of Columbo, you don't need to know anything but the questions. That's the strength of it for beginners. If you want to use Columbo in a more aggressive way, the third use of Columbo, you're going to make a point. You need to know the point you want to make. You need to know, say, the solution to the problem, if there's a problem in view. And let's just say the question is, why is Jesus the only way? So you want to make the case, or at least you want to explain why Jesus is the only way of salvation. So what do you need to know in that one? You need to know why Jesus is the only way of salvation. If you don't know that, then you can't go further. You got to know the answer to the question, but you also have to know how you're going to get there. So there are pieces to this explanation that you need to have in place. Now, let me tell you a secret about the pieces. If you take the pieces and you place them out one after another, and they lead to your conclusion, it is going to be very easy for the other person, especially if they're a little bit of a kind of aggravated as a skeptic. In other words, they're not playing ball with you very much. They're having conversation, but they're not coming along easily. Then they're going to find something wrong with everything that you say. You're going to have to put pieces on the table to get to your conclusion. In this case, how Jesus or why Jesus is the only way of salvation. But they're not going to let you finish because they're going to start taking exception with the pieces that you put out there to make your case. There's a way around this. And you can call it a trick if you want to. It's tricky, but it's not abusive. And the thing is you want to get as much as possible the other person to put the pieces on the table for you. You want to ask the kind of questions that will get them to affirm these pieces that you are going to use eventually to lead to your point. Now, if they're going to affirm those pieces, you can see, can't you, how hard it's going to be for them to take them off the table. They're their points. They've already said yes to them. They can't go back later and deny them. That's a lot more difficult for them to do. So let me show you what I mean, especially with this issue about Jesus being the only way. One of the first books I wrote was featured at Barnes & Noble, and they had me come in and give a presentation for the book. And it's the thing where the author talks about the books, answers questions, and then signs some books. Well, somebody had been standing off to the side in the maybe the religion section or whatever, and had heard some of the things I had to say. So that person came up to me and asked me a question. They said, "Why do I need to believe in Jesus? I'm Jewish," he said. I try to live as best that I can. I believe in God. So why do I need your Jesus? So that's the question, right? It can be phrased lots of different ways, but this is, why is Jesus the only way of salvation? So now I need to explain this to him, but I know I need to put some pieces on the table. So I said to him, "Do you mind if I ask you a couple questions?" He said, "No, go ahead." I said, "Here's the question." I said, first question. I said, "Do you think the people who do bad things ought to be punished?" He thought for a moment, and then he said, "Well, since I'm a prosecuting attorney, yes." Now, I got lucky in the attorney part. I didn't know that about him, but most people do have this intuition, this deep understanding of justice, that people who do bad things ought to pay for them. Okay, so good. People who do bad things ought to pay. I agree with you, I said to him. So we got a piece on the table that he put there, but I agree with it. Okay, great. Second question. Have you ever done any bad things? That's what I asked him. He paused for a moment and then said, "Well, yeah, I guess I have." Now, if he would have said he's never done any bad things, I would have said, "Can I talk to your wife?" Everybody's done bad things. We all know this. And he was just being honest with me. Okay, fine. There's another piece on the table. I said, I agree with you. I said, now, do you know where we've gotten here? Look where we've come in just 2 questions. This is what I said to him. I said, we both believe that people who do bad things ought to be punished, and we both believe that we've done those things. Do you know what I call that? I asked him. He said, what? I said, I call that bad news. Now you think about it for a moment. Do I have to tell this man that he's a sinner, I guess? He said, no, he's already told me. Do I have to tell him that he's under judgment? No, he's already told me. Now, he doesn't know where I'm going with this. He wasn't thinking about that when he walked into the Barnes & Noble. But because I asked him a very specific question that had a very straightforward, reasonable, understandable response, he gave it to me. Now I got this stuff on the table. And I told him, well, it's like you and I are both standing in the dock. And the judge, God, is there ready to deliver sentence on us, and we know we deserve it. And then God pauses and he says, hey, fellas, do either of you care about a pardon right now? Are you interested in clemency right now? I want you to see what just happened there, friend. What I did was I gathered some things that were things that he already knew. They're built into him. And now I'm using them to help him feel the force of the problem so he can feel the force of the solution. He and I are both in trouble. God is offering a way out. So what's the way out? The way out is that God became a man himself and initiated a rescue operation, living the life that we should have lived, and then getting in the docket for us so that he could take the punishment that we deserve. That's what I explained to him. I think I might have said something about Jesus taking the rap for our crimes against God. Notice the language I'm using. Why am I talking like that? Well, because he's an attorney. This is his language. It's also biblical language. The reason that Jesus is the only way is because he's the only one to solve the problem. Either he stands in the docket, gets our punishment, or we take our own punishment. That's it. If we say yes to Jesus, we're forgiven. If we say no to Jesus, then we get what we deserve to get. So there's the full expanded explanation. But do you see how I got there? I knew the explanation. I understood the problem. And I was able to explain it to somebody in non-religious terms. But what did I do to get there? I used some questions to get some important pieces on the table before I could move forward with my argument. So now you're beginning to see, if you want to go in advanced and more effective way of using Columbo, you've got to know some things. You've got to know answers to challenges. You've got to know some arguments. And you're going to get that by reading or listening or talking with other Christians. However you get it, doesn't matter. Once you get it, you want to know how you can express it in a way that others can understand it. And then as much as possible, you want to get the pieces that you need on the table by asking questions. The questions are really critical. Even though you're making a point, it keeps them engaged. Okay? Now let's take another example. Somebody at a session, Q&A session, once asked, or actually said, give me, the way he put it was, prove to me that God exists. Prove to me God exists. Now, that kind of put me on the spot. I'm there answering questions. I'm the apologist, and somebody says, prove to me God exists. It's kind of like saying you're a comedian, and somebody says, okay, be funny, like right now. Well, here's what I said to him. I said, before I go any further, I've got to repair some problem that are in your challenge. What's that? Well, you said prove. I don't know what you would count as evidence. And unless I have an idea of what would count as evidence to you, there's no sense in me giving anything that I think is a proof. And this is something you ought to keep in mind too, friends. This is, if you have somebody say, prove this or that, and you don't solve this problem, you can put evidence before them all day long, and they could just simply say, that's not what? Proof, okay? So you got to clear that up. The second thing I pointed out to him is you said, prove to me. So you want me to give you a line of thinking that is so powerful that it will even convert you. Well, I don't know what your barriers are, what your objections are, what are the kinds of things that would resonate with you. So I asked him, can you put the challenge in a little different way that doesn't put me at such a disadvantage? And incidentally, this kind of bargaining with people is entirely okay. It's a fair request. And so he said, well, maybe, can you give me some good reason that God exists? Okay, well, that was much better. I said, yeah, I think I can do that. Okay, but I have to ask you a few questions first. Now, what do I need to know before I go forward in this conversation with this guy? I need to know a good reason that God exists, right? When I know the good reason God exists, I know the steps that get me there. Then I'm going to try to have him help me by affirming the steps, put the pieces in place before I kind of get to the punchline, so to speak. All right? So here's the question I asked him. First one, I said, and in these questions I told him are kind of simple, but just bear with me. Do you think that things exist? He said, yeah, things exist. Okay, things exist. We both agree with that. Okay, here was my second question. Do you think that the things that exist have always existed? Or did they come into existence at some point of time? Now, he said, no, they haven't always existed. And there's hardly anybody around anymore that's thought about this very much, that thinks the universe is eternal, all right? That's a dead and gone idea, and partly because of the force of Big Bang cosmology. So again, I think this is something that some Christians are uncomfortable with, but just keep in mind, that's what they believe. So let's just work with that. We can use it to our advantage. No, he said, I think that things came into existence at some point in time. Big Bang, fine. I agree with you, I said. Okay, fine. So we're both in agreement about these two things on the table. Now the third question, I said to him, and this is the one that really matters. All those things that came into existence, what caused them to come into existence? And there he paused for a moment. And some people will say, well, look, what do I know? I'm not a scientist. I'm not a who am I to say? And I say, wait a minute, it's not really that hard. It's simple. There are only two possibilities. Either something caused the universe to come into existence, or no thing caused the universe to come into existence. It's just that simple. There are no other alternatives. Either something or no thing. What say you? Okay, now, for me as a questioner, I'm in a very, very good spot, because I have moved him with information he's given me to a point where now he has to make a decision, and he's stuck because he doesn't want to say that something caused the universe, because the minute he says something caused the universe, it would have to be something that is outside of the universe. You see that, right? Outside of the space-time continuum. Not something natural, but something at least supranatural, maybe supernatural. And that immediately is an assault on his maybe atheistic, materialistic point of view. He didn't want to go there. And also it would have to be not just something outside of the material universe, but something that's really powerful and probably really smart and probably personal, and there are other reasons for that. And before long, you can see we're getting pretty close to the G word here. This is starting to sound like God caused the universe. Now, he didn't want to go there. All right, fine. Then what is your only other alternative? And notice how I'm prosecuting this using questions. What is your only other alternative? Since you don't want to say something caused the universe, then you have to say that no thing caused the universe. But this is hard to say because that's worse than magic. In magic, you have a magician who pulls a rabbit out of a hat. Here you have no hat and you have no magician. You just have the rabbit, the universe coming into existence. This is wildly counterintuitive. When a wife comes home from work and sees a new Mercedes SL sitting in the garage, she asks her husband, honey, where'd that Mercedes come from? He said, I don't know, honey, it just popped into existence out of nothing for no reason. If you were his wife, would you buy that? No. Of course not. This is not reasonable. Now, maybe somebody might say, it's possible. Okay, I'm not going to argue with that. We're not trying to convince them that our view is absolutely necessary that God exists and created the universe. We just want to show him that it's the odds-on favorite. And that's what I'm doing here. Notice how I make this case, though. I'm using Columbo number 3 to make a point. The point is, in this case, that God exists. But I have to know the reason or some reasons why God exists, and I have to know how to work through that argument, and I use the questions to get as many pieces on the table as I can, and then I use them to go to my ending and then see what he says, okay? So that's one way of using the Columbo tactic, Columbo number 3, and that is by making a point, all right? Another way of using Columbo is to use your questions to exploit a weakness or a flaw, okay? So in the third use of Columbo, you can use it to advance a point, or if you see something wrong in somebody's point of view, you don't want to point it out directly, you want to use a question to get there if you can. Now again, you have to know what's wrong with their view, and how do you know that? Well, a lot of times it just requires you to concentrate, pay attention, and think about what's being said, and see if the things, we know what they think, and we know why they think it. We got to see whether those two connect. Are the reasons adequate to the task of the point of view that they're defending? Okay? That's the real issue here. Now, it may be that you don't know what's wrong. And again, then you're just going to have to just let it lie for the moment. But these are the kinds of things that we can learn in the books. Here is the place we put that book learning into play. Okay? There's no special formula here. You just got to be alert. All right? Listen carefully. Think about what was said. Okay? Once you've done that, once you've seen what the error happens to be, you want to try to exploit this error again by using Columbo, where you want to use a question. And this Columbo number 3, it does take a little bit more practice than the others, but in time, you'll improve. It requires a little bit of insight. It isn't always easy, but you'll find yourself getting there as time goes on. So don't be discouraged, all right? Once you find a challenge or a flaw that you want to exploit, you want to get the parts on the table exactly the same way and use those pieces to make your point. Now, the examples are the best way to learn this. So how about this? Somebody says you're intolerant. And this is the kind of thing, or you're bigoted, or you're narrow-minded, or whatever. This is the kind of thing that happens all the time in public conversation with people who don't like your point of view. And instead of dealing with the point of view, they'll just call you a name. Now, you might say it sometimes to the other person, look, ridicule's not an argument, which would be a fair thing to say. But in this particular case, we're going to respond by using what? Questions, okay? We're going to use our Columbo tactic. And when somebody calls you intolerant, the first thing that I recommend that you do, whenever they call you any name, is you ask them the first Columbo question. What do you mean by that? That is, what am I doing right now that makes you think that I'm somebody who has this vice called intolerance? And he says, well, you think you're right. And this is generally what's motivating this challenge. You think you're right, and you think everybody else is wrong. Okay, what do you think? Do you think that when I advance a point of view, do you think that I think I'm right? Of course I do. That's why I believe what I do. I believe it's true. If I didn't believe what I believe was true, I wouldn't believe it. I'd believe something else and think that was true instead. But I'm not the only one in this conversation that believes he's right, and that's the point I want you to get. He's getting on my case because I think I'm right, but guess what? That person thinks he's right too. And so now I have another question. Yes, I think I'm right, but I could be mistaken. I'm willing to say that, but let me ask you a question. Do you think you're right? And what's he going to say? I'm wrong about everything I believe? No, he's going to say, yeah, of course I think I'm right. Now, once in a while, people will say, well, I think I'm right for me, and they'll do that, the relativist two-step there. And if they say, well, I'm just right for me, then you say, well, then why are you talking to me right now? Sounds to me like you're correcting me. I'm doing something wrong. You got it right. I got it wrong. You want me to believe like you believe. So the fact is he does think he's right. Okay, now I've got my third question. Okay, I know how this works. I got it in my mind. I'm using questions to get to a point. He says, you're intolerant. I say, what do you mean by that? He said, you think you're right. Well, yeah, I do. But let me ask you a question. Do you think you're right? Yeah, of course he does. Here's my final question. Why is it that when I think I'm right, I'm intolerant? But when you think you're right, you're just right. What am I missing here? Now, I say that to him, but I'm not missing anything. I know what's going on here. He has reduced our conversation to common name calling. He is just calling me a name. He's calling me intolerant or bigoted or whatever it happens to be. And he's using that to substitute for reasonable conversation. What if I turned to him when he called me intolerant and I said, well, you're ugly and your mom dresses you funny? Now, I wouldn't say that kind of thing because it's not polite and it's not on point. The guy could be really ugly and really right. Has nothing to do with it. Why am I going through this conversation with him this way? I'm trying to show him his flaw, that he is just simply resorting to name calling to make a point, which is bad manners and bad thinking. And I want him to get back on the point. Whenever anybody shifts the conversation to attacking the person rather than attacking the point, you know they've made a mistake. And this is a mistake you can exploit with a little thoughtful, advanced questioning and hopefully help that person to see where they're making their mistake. So there's one example of using Columbo number 3 to exploit a weakness or a flaw. Here's another one. This is on the abortion issue. I was at a conference many years ago. We had a table with product on it, and a gentleman came up to the table, a Christian. And he said, well, I believe personally that abortion is wrong. That's my personal belief. But I don't think we should be forcing that on other people. Okay? So this is called the modified pro-choice position, and you probably heard politicians use this. Any so-called modification of the pro-choice position is always pro-choice, just to let you know. There is no such thing. Okay, but that's what they call this, okay? I'm personally against it, but I think that I shouldn't be pushing my views on other people. Okay, so this is the place where you need to ask your first Columbo question. What do you mean by that? And what I said to that man in this particular case is, why are you personally against it? I need a piece of information there. Why are you personally against abortion? You say you're against it. Why are you personally against it? Here's what he said to me. He said, because I think abortion takes the life of an innocent human being. And that's why I would never have an abortion. Okay, so now I got what I needed. And here's what I said to him. Let me just repeat back to you what I thought I heard you say. And you tell me what you think of it, okay? You actually believe that abortion kills an innocent human child. And you also think that women should be allowed to do this to their children. Is that right? Now, he started shuffling back and forth. And, well, what he said was, well, if you put it that way. I said, put it what way? That's your view. Am I distorting it? If I'm distorting it, you let me know. But that's what I thought I heard. And that is what I heard. And that is his view. And that's why that kind of view, the modified pro-choice position, is barbaric. If you actually believe that abortion kills an innocent human being, why would you think anybody should be allowed to do that kind of thing? Why would you not enforce that kind of thing? So what did I do? I used Columbo number 3. I was aware of a weakness. And because I was aware of the weakness, I could see how I wanted to get to my point, that the so-called modified pro-choice position was a bad point of view. Okay? And then I asked some questions to get him to help me get to this point. And he was stuck. He couldn't go any further. Now, did I corner him? Yes. Did I trap him? Yes. But it was completely legitimate. Okay, so that gives you an idea how to use Columbo, number 3, by using questions to make a point. Whether the point is your own point of view or the point you want to make is exploiting a weakness or a flaw. Now I want to talk for a few moments about how to improve your Columbo skill. How do you get better at this? I think the best way to improve your Columbo skills is to work on the challenges when the pressure's off. Now, when is the pressure going to be off? It's not when you're talking to somebody. That's the pressure is on. It's either going to be before or after. So that's going to give us some insight as to how to best improve. And I want you to think about 3 words. Anticipate. That is before your event, before your conversation, anticipate. Reflect. That's afterwards. And practice. Anticipate, reflect, and practice, or role play, if you will. In other words, what you want to try to do in some cases is to anticipate objections and think of questions in advance. I mean, maybe you've had some things that have stumped you. You've engaged with somebody before and they've just caught you by surprise. You haven't known how to respond to that issue. Well, figure out what the right response is. Do your research, find out a response to it, and now what you do is you figure out the right questions that will help you get to that point. Okay, once you figure out the questions that will get you to that point, then do a little role play. Practice it out loud with somebody else, by yourself. I do it in the car all the time. I'm thinking, oh, what would he say to me? Well, he'd say this, but then I'd say this, but then he'd say that, then I would say this. And I'd ask him this question. I just practice it. Because if you're practicing it out loud, you're role playing it, you're actually getting in the habit of using it. It'll be much more second nature next time around. Okay, so you might anticipate in advance. Sometimes you reflect afterwards. Sometimes you go into a situation and you come out and you think, oh my gosh, I made a mess of that. And you think to yourself, well, what question might I have asked if I was on top of things? I actually gave this teaching in the tactical teaching in a church once, and as I went into the foyer, and I escaped underneath the prayer at the end of the service so I could be there when people were coming out. The first woman that came out said to me, I'm a Christian, and I'm a Buddhist, and I'm a pagan. That's what she said. Now remember, I just finished talking about Columbo tactic. So you're thinking, what question would he come up with for that challenge? Well, here's what I said. It sounds to me like you really don't understand those three religions. Is that a question? No, it's an insult. Now, fortunately, she didn't get bugged at me, but she might have. She said, well, I do think I understand those. And then I kind of got my wits about me. And then I asked the question, I should have asked it first. And that was, what do you think Jesus would say regarding your comment that she's a Christian and a Buddhist and a pagan? And she said to me, well, I think Jesus would be just fine with it. And then the crowd comes through and sweeps her away. Okay, so I recovered a little bit. Just to let you know, I make mistakes in this too. I'm in the process. But I recovered a little bit, asked a good question, but didn't have time for a follow-up. But I did think afterwards about what I might have asked. She said, I think Jesus would have been fine with that. Oh, okay, now what? Then I realized I could have asked this. Maybe you've already thought about it. Where in the Gospels can you point to where Jesus said anything that would give you that impression? Now, I know the Gospels have no place in them where Jesus would suggest such a thing. He was a Torah-observant Jew. He was not a pluralist. He was the one who said, it's the narrow gate, not the wide gate. The narrow gate to salvation, the wide gate leads to destruction. Okay? So Jesus was narrow. But notice how I came up with that after the conversation was over. So I reflected back. So how do you improve your Columbo technique? Either you prepare in advance and then you role play it. That is, you figure out an answer to a challenge and the questions that will help you deal with the challenge, and you role play it. Or you come off a bad performance, think about how badly you did, and then you ask yourself, well, what could I have done to improve under those circumstances? And then you offer that angle, but also by questions. Figure out the questions for that, and then role play it, okay? Now, let me underscore the significance of practice. It increases your practical experience because you're actually going through the dialogue, but you're doing it in a safe environment. So try to anticipate maybe the turns or approach that your other person might take in conversation. Anticipate how you'd respond and what they might say in response, and then role play out loud if possible, and let the ideas sink in a little bit. And I tell you, if you practice in advance, when these issues come up, you'll be ready, because you've already rehearsed your response to them. It really works. I mean, take my word for it. It really works. It's the same way, by the way, political candidates prepare for televised debates, or comedians prepare for their spontaneous kind of funnies on talk shows. They come in and how are these guys so funny when just at the drop of a pin? But that isn't the way it happens. It happens because they practiced in advance. So now I want to talk and just towards the end here about how you can defend against Columbo, because I know some of you are thinking, now, this is a great thing. I can see how I can be in the driver's seat of the conversation. I can use these questions and really make progress. But what if somebody uses Columbo against me? All right, now we said there are 3 parts to Columbo. Columbo number 1, gathering information. What do you mean by that? Do you think I'm afraid of that question? I'm not afraid of that question. I like telling people what I mean by that. And plus, I've given some thought to what I mean by that. So you shouldn't have any problem with Columbo number 1. What about Columbo number 2? The second use of Columbo, gathering, or rather, reversing the burden of proof. And the question is, how'd you come to that conclusion? Do you think I'm scared of that problem? No, I love it when people ask me how I came to the conclusion, because I have come to conclusions about things. I know the reasons why I believe. And so I'm not concerned about that at all. And neither should you be if you're a good student of Christianity. It's the third one you have to worry about, because sometimes Columbo number 3 can be used against you in a manipulative kind of way. That is, the other person is going on the offensive against you, and they're asking questions that you sense are meant to set you up or trap you so he can exploit what he thinks are weaknesses in your own view. Now, I encourage you to do this because I'm trusting your charity in doing it, that you're not doing something illicit or inappropriate, or you're not just trying to make them look bad. But you can't trust other people in the same way, because sometimes they're just trying to make you look bad. So how do you keep from being taken advantage of, I guess is the best way of putting it in this situation? Well, here's what I suggest. First, you stop the advance, okay? You might say something like, well, as he's asking questions and wants you to answer, and you're starting to wonder, is he leading me down the primrose path? You could say, you're asking a lot of questions here, and sometimes it confuses me, because I get the feeling that you don't really want to know the answers to the questions, but you just want to know, want me to kind of commit myself because you're going somewhere else. You're going to make a point down the line. And that makes me a little uneasy. So I'd rather not answer a lot of questions at this particular point, if that's okay with you. So the first thing you're doing is you're just stopping the advance. The second thing you do is you want to regain control. You want to get back in the driver's seat, because he's in the driver's seat with his questions, right? So you want to get back in control. And so you can say this to him. Why don't you just simply state your point? What do you mean by that? State it clearly so I don't misunderstand it. And then give me your specific reasons. That's Columbo number 2. How'd you come to that conclusion for your view? See how flexible these questions are, okay? And then let me chew on it for a while and see what I think. Now that's the way to protect yourself. This is very similar to getting out of the hot seat, but you're not quite in it yet. You just getting the feeling that he's asking these questions and you're going to get in trouble if you are not careful. So then you just put a halt to it. You say, it seems like you're trying to make a point with the questions. That's kind of confusing for me. I'm not exactly sure how to respond all the time, but why don't you just make the point? Say what you mean and why you believe it, and that'll be fine, and I'll think about it. All right? So let's review what we've covered here in this session. First, we learned the third use of Columbo. We're going to use questions to make a point or to lead someone somewhere. We want to exploit a weakness or a flaw, or maybe make a point about our own point of view. Okay? I told you the way to do this is you're going to have to, in your own mind, know the point. You're going to have to solve the problem and know the pieces that you have that you need to get there. And as much as possible, it's not always going to be ideal to do this, but as much as possible, get them to put the pieces on the table by the questions that you ask, okay? You get that all on the table, and then you use those pieces that the person you're talking with helped put there, and you use those pieces to make your point. The second thing we learned was how to improve your Columbo skill. I gave you 3 words: anticipate, reflect, and practice, and these are very simple to keep in mind. Either before you anticipate the problems, or after you you take a look at what you've done and reflect on how badly you did. In either of those cases, the pressure's off. So you can work on those issues and then work on the questions that can get you where you want them to take you. And then role play it. This is really important. And the more you role play it, the more natural it's going to become. And then finally, we learned how to defend against the Columbo tactic when it's used against you. The first question of Columbo, you shouldn't have to worry about it. The second question of Columbo, you shouldn't have to worry about it. But the third one, where they're using questions to lead you, Then you want to stop the advance. You want to say, well, why don't you just make your point and let me respond to it. So you're stopping the advance, then you're regaining control by asking him to change his approach, but still giving him a chance to make his point, okay? So that's how that works. Now, I want you to do some homework before your next session. Here's what I want you to do in the next few days or week, whatever. I want you to find a friend or two, and I want you to teach them the basics of Columbo 1, 2, and 3. You know it's not that hard. I've already given it to you. You've got notebook right there you can use. Let them know what you're learning, how it's helping you, and explain to them the basic facts. Walk through them as best you can. And encourage them to just start using Columbo number 1 to get used to it, gathering information. And they can do that for a week or two to get kind of rolling. And if you teach it to them, I guarantee you, you're going to learn it better for yourself. Now, in our next session, we'll learn one good way to discover a certain type of weakness or a flaw. I call that tactic the suicide tactic, and we'll talk about it then.
So what do you guys think? I think he makes a good point. He talked about the getting out of the hot seat earlier. I think let me think about it is really a good response, because there's times where you feel like you're getting overwhelmed. Yeah, let's talk about it. It's what he calls the steamroller. We'll get to that in a later session, but we don't have to engage, just like the other person doesn't have to engage, and we shouldn't force ourselves on them either. If they are wanting a way out, we should leave them with the nugget and let it go, because if you push harder, you usually don't have success. I think the real power to his approach is non-combative, conversational, and it's cordial, right? It's supposed to be a give and a take of a conversation, and stay away from the lecture type approach. So good. All right, so page 55.
We're more good than Christians too when you're discussing stuff.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Well, because, okay, for instance, okay, I got my doctorate degree in a certain thing, and I'm telling you about it. You don't have the same background I just had. At a certain point, can you just tell me what's going on, and then let me marinate on it, let's get back together and talk about it. Don't let someone steamroll you because they've thought it completely through, and you haven't had a chance.
Right.
You want to be, we're always on the search for truth together. We're not trying to convince somebody per se, we're trying to discover the truth together. And I think we have to make sure we're doing it in the right spirit. Because we can be sure we're right and still be wrong.
Until you don't know, until somebody points your blinders.
Yeah, well,
Everybody has blinders.
yeah.
And takes angles stuff you've never thought of before. So if you're not open to listening to others, like, okay, whether there's a point there, or it's like it's nonsense until you really process it through.
Yeah, I think seeing it through other people's perspectives is a real valuable technique for us as Christians, because one, it helps us to see the flaws in someone else's perspective, so we can help them see the flaws in their perspective if there is one. It also helps us to see the flaws in our perspective, and we often have flaws, at least I know I do. All right, so page 55, ambassador skills. Bottom of the page, here we go. When someone's cherished view is at stake, it's not unusual for him to raise empty objections.
Yeah.
Objections that initially sound worthwhile but simply can't be defended once examined. Probing with questions, Columbo style, often reveals the lack of substance behind the bluster. Like the emperor and his new clothes, all it takes is one person to say you're naked and the game is up. Don't settle with always being on the defensive. Sometimes it's okay to go on the offensive and challenge the other person's views by asking penetrating questions. That is the key to the Columbo tactic, placing the burden of proof on your friend when he or she makes a claim. So I think that it's like the two sides you have to really balance is when they make a false claim and they're blustering, sometimes you need to push one or two levels past that, because if you let the bluster win, you don't really accomplish anything either. So what are you guys' thoughts? See, you guys are quiet.
My thought of that is, it's true though, that if you're getting to that level 3, you need to have some sense in you. You need to have that, whatever you have to explain, because if you got nothing to say,
Well, that's the reason we did the first class, right? To try to
Like,
build some knowledge
you
base.
got to have a knowledge base to explain yourself. Because if you don't, then you cannot do this.
Then you're on just on the second two.
Yeah.
It's like, I'll get back to you. Let me
Yeah,
think about
that's
it.
true.
And then get back to
But
you.
then go find a
you need to,
resource
like-
to build that.
I don't have.
That's
You need to
important.
have the knowledge
I don't have
base.
the knowledge base.
Like if you haven't think in your brain, how are you gonna answer somebody that asks why Christianity? Like what we've watched, like why Jesus? Like I remember before I asked why Seventh-day Adventist? I don't know. Like nothing.
So, yeah, I had to go back and think about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've never met the person again, but I have to think about it.
Well, it's something you need to think about. Actually, it's one of the challenges I'm going to give to my pastors in the Philippines this week is most of them are Baptists. Well, an honest question that people are going to ask you is why?
Why?
Baptist, right? And you need to understand why you have your stances, and also that it's not exclusive to that stance. And so you need both of those things when you're presenting that comeback. So we're going to have that conversation. I think it's always be in the pursuit of truth. And if you are overwhelmed and don't know the answer, just say, hey, give me your idea because I want to learn. And then let me go think about it and we can talk again. And
Yeah.
I think that's really powerful.
That's true. When you got nothing there, after the second one, you said like, okay, what do you got? And
What you got?
what you got, and let me think about it. Let me write it, and we'll
Well,
talk again.
You know, it's the same as his last point where when you feel that someone's trying to lead you down the path to try to trap you, it's like, just hold it. It's like, I just want to understand your perspective. Can you just give me your perspective and then let me think about it? And then, because I'm getting confused. And I think you see people try to overwhelm people with questions so often, and they're really just trying to break down your defenses so that they can take advantage of you.
There's also some people that would keep on saying things, and it doesn't make sense anymore. They just talk like Stuart. He was talking about how do why the Bible, why is the Bible reliable? And he got into Augustine, that he's a science guy. It's like, no, he's a philosophy guy. He's not a science guy. And you're saying things that are not right.
Well, from our perspective, we make sure that when we're making statements, it's actually
Correct.
correct. Yeah, well,
it needs to be
obviously, but
correct.
it also needs to be addressing the question that was asked. What we saw, we do this where we listen to Q&As and then we stop it and try to see if we can come up with better responses. Well, we've seen too often that the Christian apologist guy answers the question that he planned on answering instead of the question that he was asked. And it often misses. So you need to listen and then
Yeah.
process.
The intolerance was the first question, and they never answered it. And they got into so much different topics, there's so much crazy stuff. It's also the intolerance.
But I thought Greg did a great job of addressing that, because the thing is, how do you define, whatever that term is, how do you define the term?
Intolerance.
And then what am I doing that you
being
think
intolerant?
makes me that way? And then aren't you doing the exact same thing?
That's what
I
I
mean,
always said, aren't you being intolerant to me?
Yeah, I mean, it always circles back. We see this in our society a lot now, where the things we're accused of is often what they're doing to us.
Yeah, kind of like the lady that you had a fight with. You're bothering her by your loud volume.
Yeah, but she's doing it.
Exactly what she was doing.
All right, let's go to page 57, the interactive study. These are some challenges for us to talk about. So see if you can answer or can uncover the flaws in the common challenges below. Then suggest a question that begins to address the underlying flaw. If you get stalled on one of the challenges, we can move on, but we won't get stalled. We'll come up with something. So the first one is, you're in a conversation with somebody and they say, you shouldn't push your morality on me.
What do you mean by that?
What do you mean by that? It's a good start. What else could you do?
What morality did I push to you?
No, that's excellent. But basically asking them, what's the foundation for what they've just claimed? Because they've claimed that I'm trying to push something on them. You'll see a twist on this is often when we start talking about abortion is really common. They use this.
Yeah.
It's like you shouldn't try to legislate your morality. And it's like, well, all laws legislate morality. That's the purpose of laws. It's all about morality. There are none that aren't.
Except to turn that into a question, like he said.
Yep.
Well, do you think all laws push morality? You know, instead of, we want to just tell them, right?
Yep. So you use the two questions like, well, what's the purpose of laws?
Yes, right.
And they'll say right and wrong, right? Well, isn't right and wrong morality? Isn't that what it's about? And then they're trapped. But you shouldn't push your morality on me. They've just pushed their morality on you. So how are you going to diffuse it? And I think, Sonny, you're right. It's like, what is it that I just did that you perceived that I was doing that?
That's wrong. That's.
What is it that I did?
You think that's immoral.
Yes. What did I do that made you think that? And then once they've responded, then you can lay out the path you want to go.
Are you not pushing your own morality on me?
Well, see, that's a challenge.
Yeah,
That's what we want to say, but we shouldn't do that.
But you shouldn't say that because
No, you want to ask them, it's like, what is it that I'm doing? Well, you can play victim a little bit.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
what did I do that made you think that I was doing that?
Yeah.
And then once they've laid that piece on the table, then you got to look at how you're going to extend
Yeah,
it.
you have to think, okay, let's say you shouldn't push your morality on me. And then you ask like, so what do you think, what
did I do?
What did I do? Well, you're trying to tell me that abortion is
Wrong. Let's use abortion. Well, then the question
you
is,
shouldn't be like,
do you think
people
abortion?
should have a choice. That's what they always say.
Well, the question is, do you think
Women should
abortion
have a choice.
is okay?
Well,
And they're-
typically,
They're going to say yes. Well,
Yes.
then isn't that a moral decision?
Yeah.
Because it's morality. You're saying it's okay to kill babies. I'm saying it's not okay to kill babies. You shouldn't push your morality on me. I should be allowed to say that I'm against killing babies.
I have a coworker that said that those are not babies yet.
Well, that's a different conversation. We're actually going to get to that one in a second. It's on one of our lists.
Let me give you that conclusion.
So let's wait on the baby one for
So
later.
it's gotta be,
That's what you hear all the time.
But I think when it comes down to the morality one is first ask them why they're perceiving that you're pushing your morality on them, because they're pushing something back at you. I mean, we both have a perspective on what right and wrong is, and your right is no more right than mine unless there's evidence to back it up. But I have a right, by their own assertion, to share what I believe is right, because they want to share what they believe is right. That's where you want to get. You want to get back on the even footing. Intolerance is you're intolerant and arrogant. And
How am I intolerant?
What do you mean by?
what do you mean by that?
what do you mean by that? Well, there's two here.
Yeah.
And I think you have to pick the one that you want to focus on.
I think I'd
'Cause
go with intolerant.
Because I probably am guilty of the arrogant part.
Yeah.
So I think maybe you have to just take acceptance. And it's like, why do you perceive that I'm being intolerant? What did I do?
Why you came to that conclusion?
Or
Yeah.
what do you think intolerant means? That's, what do you mean
What
by
do you mean
that
by
question? It's,
I think it's better to say, what do you mean by that, but saying like, what do you mean intolerant? Like, then you're questioning there. The other one is you're just trying, you're questioning them intellectually.
Yeah.
If you say, what do you mean by that? You want to know their specific, like,
well, because
yeah,
I think,
specific definition, not challenging their understanding of what intolerant is.
well, and the problem is,
Yeah.
in our current culture, they define things for themselves.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to basically have them define what they mean
Yeah,
by
yeah.
intolerant. What do they mean by arrogant? Because you have to understand where they're coming from so that you can try to, one, show that they're being exactly the same
Typically,
way
they
to
will
you.
tell you like you're arrogant because you sound like you know it all. Like you think you're right. That's typically what you get
And
if
so
you ask
should-
arrogant.
If they do that, then you use exactly what Greg did. It's like, so do you think you're right in saying that about me? And all of a sudden now they're right, so they're just as arrogant as you are, right?
So we're equally
But I think,
intolerant and
but I
arrogant.
think in these, you're just trying to put things, these are name callers. These aren't, they're not trying to continue a
it's not-
conversation because they have nothing.
Yeah,
So the key is
stop a
bring the
conversation.
conversation back on even, and then you can engage in a productive way. But you have to bring it back to level ground.
Instead of just the name calling.
Yeah, because you're calling me intolerant and arrogant. Well, you actually have to be intolerant and arrogant in order to actually make that claim. That's just the facts. Lead them to expose it. The first one, you shouldn't push your morality on me. Well, you just did. Okay? Everybody does, because if we believe there's right and wrong, then if I believe it, of course I want to share it because I think it's right. There's actually nothing wrong with that. Actually, both of these claims are actually not negative, except the way they were presented it. I mean, we are this way
We
because
are.
we're engaged in a conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, intolerance is a bad word, I think, because it's misconceived, but I don't agree with you, so I'm not tolerant of your view. Okay, I'm not.
But
You're not
the
tolerant of
same.
mine either.
Yeah, we're the same. But,
It's
but
not,
most people don't realize that because
It's one of those, it's bad when I'm doing it, but not when you're the one doing it. So we're equally doing it, so we're on the even ground.
well, Greg brought up the sidestep that a lot of people will go to is this relativism. Well, if they go there, it's over. You gotta, and you have to push through that, because if they say, well, it's okay for me, it's okay for me and not for them, it's like,
No.
so why are you talking to me?
Yeah, why are you telling me?
You have to challenge that one actually in a more aggressive way. Is if it's relative, then why are you
bothering me with your-
challenging my perspective?
if everything is
If it's really relative,
yeah.
then my
It should-
perspective
my
is
perspective
just
should
as
be
valid as yours.
as acceptable as yours.
Yeah, they just proved their point
Yeah.
with circular logic, right? Next one. The miracles in the Bible prove it's a myth. I actually heard this from
Yeah,
somebody.
one of the questions, they said it's all myth.
So how would you,
How could you come up with that conclusion?
well, how do you come to that conclusion?
What do you mean by that?
What do you mean by that? But you got to be a little more. You got to have more to your question than just that.
So what do you mean by, what do you mean by?
Miracle and myth. Miracle and myth are the two key words
What-
here.
Yeah, what do you
So-
mean by myth and miracles?
Well, that,
Miracles you think are a myth.
And
yeah. What,
You'll have to come up with
why do you
some.
think the miracles in the Bible are myths?
Uh,
Basically, what's your basis for that?
yeah.
How did you come to that
Yeah,
conclusion?
how did you come to that conclusion?
Because you're wanting them, if it's a miracle, it's supernatural.
Because they're.
Supernatural event.
Well, this is what they're gonna say, okay. Let's say they say, you said like, what do you mean by myths and miracles? Well, they typically would say like, that accounts in the Bible couldn't not have happened. It's ridiculous. It's like, it's defying like.
The laws of
the
nature.
Laws of nature. And it couldn't be. There's no, like, you didn't see it, I didn't see it.
You know,
How
and-
you answer to that?
How did you come to that conclusion?
Well,
Well, I didn't see it, that's why.
but
I don't believe it.
I
because
don't have
see
any
it. I didn't
firsthand
see it.
evidence of the miracle in the Bible. but the question is do I have to have firsthand evidence to believe something? That's well, you probably have to go there and say, well, what have you not witnessed that you believe?
Yeah.
Anything
mean,
100 years from, like,
well, no-
years ago.
Even something that's happening today.
What you did not personally see.
Is there today is there a war in the Ukraine?
You don't see
You
it.
have not actually seen it,
You've never been.
But you
you're
believe
not
it.
there.
but you believe it.
Well, I remember the guy said, like, it's been, you know, that what the region, it's been like 2,000 years ago. And how would you know that it's still, you know, is he saying that as time goes by, information degrades and you don't get the full, like,
Well,
it gets diluted or whatever, you know, that's what Paul said. It gets corrupted as time goes by so what do you call this? I think Cliff asked him, is like, what about do you believe that the first president in America, the history of that? It's like, yeah, but that's only 500 years. And you're talking about like 2,000 years ago.
Well, and that's true.
That's what he
But
said.
the question is, what history do you believe that is ancient?
How about this?
I mean,
do you believe that Alexander the Great existed? Alexander the Great is older.
yeah, yeah. I mean, Alexander the Great is a
Or
great.
the Iliad,
or
or the Iliad.
Or
Those stories.
The Bible people believe it's not existing, but once you get evidence, they believe it's existing even before the Bible.
Right.
Yeah, so, yeah, it's one of those, it's like, and Bible is early.
Then they just find evidence to.
I think you got to decide how far you want to go with the question. It's like, there is archaeological evidence for the stories that are in the Bible. Okay, maybe not the miracles, but the stories that are in the
Yeah.
Bible, which give great credibility to the story that are in the Bible. So not everything in the Bible can be considered a myth, because we have scientific evidence to support many of the accounts. And I think that's you have to kind of move the pendulum a little bit to the point where not everything in the Bible is like that. Then we're going to address miracles. Well, by definition, miracle is supernatural.
Natural.
So of course it violates all natural laws. That we both completely agree with that, because if it didn't violate natural laws, it wouldn't be a miracle. So we can agree on the definition of a miracle. So now the question is myth or not myth? And you may not be able to get there, because I believe supernatural can happen. If the other person doesn't believe supernatural can happen, I'm not sure how you can go there, other than to say there's accounts in the Bible where things have been predicted thousands of years into the future. That's pretty supernatural. You know, then you might have to take some dives that way, looking at prophecy or other things to show that the stories in the Bible, that's supernatural, to be able to look into the future.
Or even the logical explanation on the behavior of the apostles. The only logical explanation that they can come up with, they saw the risen Christ.
The only
It's
reason
only sensible.
Yeah, the only reason I wouldn't go there is that's
Explanation.
the one that people resist the most. I'd like to find a miracle that is less obvious. I think actually the story of the blind man that didn't even know who Jesus was, it's a very historical account, and he didn't know. And there are extra biblical accounts that talk about the miracles of Jesus. Josephus is one of them. So there are accounts of some of these events that aren't in the Bible. That is true.
Verify that.
Yeah, which is a pretty good corroboration that something happened. Okay, what about the next one? Jesus was a good man and a prophet, but he wasn't God or the only Savior. Oof.
Well, how'd you come up to that conclusion?
You got to ask them that to start with.
So,
Why do you
He's
say,
a good man.
why do you say Jesus is a prophet? What is the prophet?
That's excellent, because they have to actually use the story in the Bible to prove that he's a prophet.
Yeah.
And what defines a good man?
Well, Jesus himself says only one is good. So the only way Jesus can be good is if he's God. C.S. Lewis said he's
No.
either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord.
Or Lord, it can't be,
No, you cannot.
You can't have the good man and prophet.
I would answer this is like, how, you know, you're saying that he can't be God, but he claimed that he is God.
How can he be a good man?
because
Yeah, how can you say he's a good man if he's not the God that we're saying? Then he's a liar.
Yeah.
Then he's like trying to deceive us.
Yep.
Because he said he is God, because he claimed to be God. He can't be a good man if you're trying to cheat people.
Well, the common
can't be.
counterclaim is
I guess
that Jesus never claimed to be God in
Yes,
the Bible, but we
well, we
can
agree.
correct that.
I guess one leading question is like, is a liar a good man?
Yeah. Is lying person a good man?
But
Well, and only Savior. Well, he specifically says himself in the Bible, I am
He's
the
the only
only way. Okay, no one can get to the Father except through me. He says he's the only
But I
way.
don't believe that.
Well, if you don't believe the Bible, then you can't call him a good man or a prophet.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the thing. So
Now,
I think
what makes you say that he's a good
what
good
makes you
man
say
and a
that he's
prophet?
good
no,
or
and
a
a
prophet?
prophet.
They have to give you the basis
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
And once they've given you a basis for why they think he's a good man and a prophet,
It's a slogan, typically.
well, but the thing is,
They don't have reasons.
but you
They
can't go
don't.
you can't have it both ways,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
can't let them have it
You
both
expose
ways.
them.
And I think that's where the flaw in the
That's-
argument
that's-
approach, where you
that's
ask the
what Greg was
question to
saying.
expose the good part so you can pull in, well, if you believe that, then it has to be this.
When you ask the question, you might get the deer in the headlights.
Yeah, that's true.
Because that is just a reaction of somebody just spouting a slogan. I have no real basis. for
No.
what they're
Yes,
saying.
when they say that, they're just saying that so that they can get to God as isn't the only savior. Because they don't really believe
So
he's a good man.
Yeah,
China,
no,
we
no,
say-
they don't have no idea.
They're just
They got no
wondering.
idea.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, so this is a way in traditional wisdom in China, people will move like playing a chess. They move
Yeah.
a little bit behind. The first sentence is like, I agree this, like I move my chess,
Mhm.
a little behind, but I check the king because, then I set a trap. It's like I agree with a little bit, so I already a little bit, not the bad, but I hope you also can, step back a little bit.
No, I think that's what they're doing, but that's the reason I think you need to push the first part. And what's their basis for saying that?
I am. I'm saying he's a good man and a prophet.
Mhm.
Well, and that's always,
It's giving you something good.
I've always wondered, Islam is one of them. They believe Jesus was a
Virgin
great prophet, believe in the virgin
Birth.
birth, but don't believe he's God. They believe the Bible is God's word, yet they don't
It's just
believe what it
corrupted.
says
Well, because it's corrupted now.
because it's corrupted.
It's
That's-
not pure. That's what they say.
Yeah, and we were talking to our friend. He has a roommate as Muslim, and then he said like Abraham was sacrificing Ishmael,
Ishmael, yeah.
instead of
Isaac.
Isaac. Yeah.
Yeah, so they basically erase the story in the Bible,
Uh-huh.
even though they claim the Bible to be Holy Scripture. And that, yeah, it's the common, and they believe that because Muhammad said that in the Quran. That's how
That's what they're taught. That's what
they're taught. But that's one of those head-ons that's, you have to establish the validity of the Bible account, or you have to know a heck of a lot about the Quran to show that it has obvious contradictions in it. You have to know one of those two paths if you're going to engage. So you either educate yourself a lot or try to educate them a lot. For me, I have to do the educate a lot, because if I try to learn everything about the Quran, I don't really wish to know, right?
Well, with the question that he's not the only savior. It's like, I think it's
There are multiple gods.
yeah, you're saying that it's not the only way. How can you say he's the only way? But then you can say like, well, what do you mean by that? Because every religion has a different way.
Well,
and
I
has
think
a
you want them to
different
put that on the table for you.
Yeah.
So it's just like, if Jesus is not the only way, what other ways are there?
What are the ways?
And have them actually lay, they
And
may
those
not
are
have
different.
anything.
Those are
Yeah,
different
what's
ways.
related out religions?
They cannot be the same. One would be right and some would be wrong.
Yeah, they can all be right.
Put it on the table, then you can,
Yeah, instead of making a claim, you want to ask the question and make them lay it.
Yeah, well, that's the person that made a claim.
Yep.
I guess it was him that was like, with the different religions, it's like,
Lead to all the
religions in the
things.
world, it's like, what do we have here? It's like, we can all be wrong, but we can all be right.
You cannot be all right. Yeah, because
We're all claiming
Muslims
different
said they're
things.
going to paradise with 10 virgins, and nirvana is different. Buddha say you're gonna be free from all these.
Well, all religions
And the-
are exclusive,
Yeah,
so they can't all be right. That's the reason pluralism
be
doesn't
wrong,
work,
but
because
we
they
can't
can all be
right.
wrong, but they can't
They
all
can't be all right.
right. All right, so the
they're a
abortion issue.
fetus.
Fetus may be a human being, but it's not a person. I have heard this one.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, yes.
yeah.
So what is a person?
What is a person?
What is a person? I mean, I'm not sure I understand what you're telling me. Can you explain to me what is a person and how that is different than a human being?
Yeah.
And usually they'll bring up consciousness or ability to take care of themselves,
Well,
which blows up because
blows up,
invalids,
yeah.
newborn babies, older people, but there's anybody that's ever been under anesthesia for surgery, they all fail those tests of being a person
By their definition.
by their definition, and it's important to be able to walk down that path. Yeah, those are the two common paths. One is being able to take care of yourself, and the other one is
Somebody that
consciousness.
had a stroke, still breathing.
Well, and we've seen the acts of abortion and how the baby responds to the event that's taking place. That's
It's
consciousness.
pretty amazing now that because of ultrasound, abortion dropped.
Yeah,
No, pro-life increased in number.
well, what happens is the statistics are pretty extreme, that once they see an ultrasound, they don't have
Yes.
abortion. If you can get a mother to have an ultrasound, it's
To
very
see the
unlikely
baby.
they're gonna
Yeah.
go through
That
with an
it's
abortion.
alive and
Because you can see-
it's human.
Yeah, you can see that it's
It's funny though, they're saying that, oh, before they have heartbeat. I said, I have heartbeat in 2 weeks. My babies have heartbeat, but they do have heartbeat. But the thing is, you can do it with the probe that it's inserted to your
'cause
vaginal canal.
yeah, when you have
Outside, you cannot
fertility,
hear it.
they checked the
We
embryos
check it right away.
internally, right? So
2 weeks.
I mean,
2 weeks. there's
everything is
heartbeat.
there. It's just amazing is when those two cells come together, they have everything they need for existence. There's nothing lacking other than time.
Yeah, it's just
Isn't that
time.
amazing?
Uh,
It's just amazing.
There's a miracle.
and consciousness, we have no idea when consciousness begins, so we can't say pick a time. But you see, but to use consciousness defeats the argument because there's so many things that can happen to you after you're born
Everybody that's asleep
that would put you
can
into
be
the,
killed.
well, if you could go that far, right? Because if you're not unable to interact with the environment, and
It comes down to like, oh, they should have a right to do what they want to their body.
that's
That's
the
a
argument.
typical argument
but
that they
it's
say.
Really not their body. It's
Not
another
their
body.
body.
Well,
Just a caretaker.
I'll go a little further. I think COVID-19 took away that argument. I haven't seen anybody go after it yet, but I'll say it here on the record since it'll be posted on the internet. We allowed the government to tell us what to do with our bodies. They told us we couldn't go out. We told us we couldn't do this. That's telling me what to do with my body against my
follow
will. And we willfully agreed to let someone else tell us what was right and wrong for our body. So,
Even if it's kind of stupid
And-
at
and-
times.
and it was, some of it was completely stupid, like, putting 2 masks on top of its.
Oh no,
itself.
putting mask while you're next to the family that
spouse.
you live with.
Yes, or social distancing for the person you sleep next to every night.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, they want, that is someone telling you what you can do with your body against your will.
The plane ride. Before you
Oh,
get
yes.
into the plane, you have to be
Sit next
6
to each
feet
other.
away, and then you sit elbow
You're
to
6 feet
elbow.
away going in, and then you're right next to your.
It's so stupid. It's like, oh my gosh, this
But-
is so crazy.
But that's an example of
Freaking crazy.
people allowing other people to tell them what they can and cannot do with their body. So that argument doesn't work anymore.
Yep.
Oh, it's a healthcare decision. Well, what about the healthcare of the unborn child? Those are equally health requirements.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of nowadays that they accept it because they would check the baby, oh, the baby has Down syndrome, and they would abort them.
Yep.
Medically abort them.
And,
other problem.
and I think that's
Yeah,
still,
any kind of genetical problem, like, they would.
well, I know there was a time in China that if it was a girl, they would abort the baby because they wanted boys. And that's still selective murder is what it is. But you're taking your personal choices and you're inflicting irreparable harm on another human
How
being.
about this? Yeah, the Down syndrome baby that's still inside the womb, what's the difference between the Down syndrome that's already been
Out. Yeah.
Can you murder
Should
them
we
too?
just kill all the Down syndrome kids that already been born?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, that's, you get, the problem with the abortion arguments is they lead you down the path of euthanasia, where you're picking and choosing,
Who lives and who dies. That's right.
and when do you choose? You know, if a child, they'll always use incest. Incest it's like, well, they should be allowed to abort their children. Well, what about this 3-year-old that was the product of incest? Should I be able to kill them? They're 3 years old, but they still exhibit all those same requirements that you thought were necessary to terminate. What's the difference? And I think it's a moral decision, and they're trying to say we shouldn't push our morality on them.
It's really crazy here in America because it's like once they were born, even if they're disabled and stuff, I mean, this country, they take care of like those kids. Like other countries, they don't get taken care of. They don't. I mean, I'm amazed the way parents would take care of kids that have problems.
Yes,
I mean, so much trouble, so much like sacrifices that they put on, but then, oh, let's just get rid of it by still in that womb. It's like, that's crazy.
What about the fact that, let's say a pregnant woman, this is one that Ken and I talk about so much, that's pregnant, and you kill, how is it
When
worded?
you kill a woman when the baby dies, you're guilty of killing the baby.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
what's the difference?
double murder.
Yeah, what's the difference?
I don't know.
Abortion? I don't either.
It's the law here. It's like double murder if you kill a pregnant
Well,
woman.
I mean,
But then if a mother, chooses to
remember,
abort,
all
she's not.
law legislates morality. So there's some morality where that baby is considered to be a person. And then there's another perspective within the law that that baby is not a person. So it's conflicting, but it's well within our rights to point out that conflict and say we don't agree with it. It's not within their rights to tell us we shouldn't have an opinion. And that's really the
Yeah.
difference. I cannot force my opinion on somebody else, even if I think it's horrific. The government has a right to write their laws any way they want, but I have a right to say I don't agree with it. That's the
Yeah, it
part of
doesn't
this
make
argument.
you
I have a
bigot
right to
or
say why I believe
intolerant.
this.
Yeah.
Well, they're being intolerant, then
To
they
be
don't want to
cute.
hear
Yeah.
my view. Now, I cannot control the law. I think it's horrendous. I think it is murder. But I can't do anything about that if I don't have the law on my side, other than to say this is what I believe. And the fact they just don't want to hear it is really their problem, not ours.
I have a good argument for, you always hear rape. Well, she's a victim, and somebody was explaining they were a baby whose mother chose to have them, even though she was raped. And she said, but if you kill the baby, now you have two victims. The mother was a victim, now you made the baby a victim, if you kill them. So,
Well, I like the story Frank Turk gave along that line about the pastor that got up and confronted the atheist in one of his Q&As and basically said his mother was raped, almost killed. He's that baby. And if his mother can make good out of evil, then how much more can God? It's bad things happen.
Yeah.
And I don't always, I can't explain it. I don't necessarily understand it, but I know God
Bad
can.
things happen because people choose to do bad.
Yeah.
They have free will to do evil or good.
And that could impact me.
And you choose to do evil. That's got nothing to do with God.
But God is capable of using those
Yes.
horrific events for good.
Something good. Yes.
That's what God can do. Despite of the fact that we messed up our world, He can still use our messiness our messed up, decisions to bring something good out of that.
Yeah.
There's another saying of some viewpoints in China,
Mm.
because like people interview some of the lady who do the abortion,
Mhm.
and then their response was like, "This life is so tough. It's my mercy not bringing the baby to the world." They say that.
Right.
Well, well, no, if you don't believe in God, there's something to that perspective. I mean, I don't agree with it, but it is, life is hard. And
Why bring a life?
They made themselves God.
but effectively they've made themselves God.
Like they were God, you know.
Well, let's do this last question. I don't think we're going to get any further today. How can God exist when there is so much evil in the world? This is the classic problem of
Classic.
evil. And it comes at you from all different perspectives. You have to be ready for this one if you're going to engage. What do you think? Someone says it that way. Well, define evil.
Define evil. What?
I don't know. It's a good start.
Can you define evil?
Well, I think most people, if you would ask them, what made them come to that conclusion, they'll be a little stumped. It's like, well, everybody knows there's
Okay.
evil in the world.
Susan, one of my coworkers said we heard this news that this kid got brutally raped and abused, child. And she made a comment like, this is the reason why I don't believe there's a God. And it was way, way before, so I don't know what to say.
What would you say now? Let me start. So first thing, you have to acknowledge the fact that it's a horrific event. Because the problem of evil is difficult because it's emotional. It's like, yeah, I agree. That is just
And it's just bad.
horrific event.
Terrible.
How do you think it is that we know that it's bad? I think you got to take people to how are they making the moral argument without a basis for a moral argument? How do we know things like that are so bad?
I think, I think you have to go back to the fact that if you don't believe in God, then anything goes.
Well,
Because it's just your opinion against somebody else's opinion. If there's no transcendent rule or standard, if there's no standard.
yeah, so that's the argument of evil for God, is basically saying, what is the basis for judging something good or bad, evil or good? And people have to be able to give you a definition and a basis. And if they can't,
So
then-
what would you ask first? If you said that's the reason why I don't believe there's God, because of this incident.
well, I think I agree that
What do
an
you say?
incident is horrific. But the question you have to ask, I think I'd go all philosophical on them. The question I ask myself is, how do I know that is bad? And see what they would say.
Well, I'm pretty sure because I know her, she's gonna say come on, that's bad. Somebody's, raping a child and it's a child.
But
that it's
How
wrong.
do I know that bad? Because that rapist didn't think it was bad.
So I would ask, so you believe God is responsible for other people, the decisions that?
No, we said there's no God. That's why there's no God.
They don't think God is
It's
guilty. They think God
There's-
doesn't exist because,
She said there's no. This is the reason I don't believe there's God, because bad things happen.
but,
She believes there's God.
well, of course,
blaming it on
you're
God.
making a moral argument, right? The thing is, the person that perpetrates that evil thing
Do you think
thought
it's
they
good or
didn't
bad?
think it was bad, or they wouldn't have
Who
done
wouldn't
it.
done it?
Hitler is always the classic one I go to. It's like, he thought he was actually helping
Doing a favor to
humanity.
humanity.
He even did it in the name of God, maybe not the God we believe,
Well-
because he thought he was purging the world of
Bad stuff.
the bad things, so we call imperfections in the world. But he didn't think what he was doing was wrong.
No.
We think it was wrong. So it's not innate in us unless we have a standard. The people that don't share the standard are always the ones that perpetrate the activities because they've put that standard away. But you and I, or third person, can always come to a standard that's universal. What doesn't matter what country you're in, what time in history you're in, the exploiting of a young child, like was just described, will be considered bad. Why is that? It's cross-cultural. Okay, so it's not culturally based.
Standard.
It's not based on human flourishing. It has to be based on a standard that's transcendent because
Well,
it doesn't
everybody
matter
feels
where
that way.
you're at. People feel that
feel
way.
that. Yeah.
It doesn't mean people don't do horrible things in cultures. Cultures accept human
So, okay,
sacrifice,
So,
but
so let's
children.
say she said like, it's bad, abusing a child is bad.
But I have to always ask myself, why do I know it's bad?
So, no, like, talk to me like, how do
No,
you?
no, I said, I agree with you, but the question really is, how do we know it's bad? It really is a question you have to ask. How do we know that? Because
Well, I
every-
guess you got to go back to the rapist doesn't think so. The abuser doesn't think so, because that's the reason why they did it.
yeah,
They did it because they think there's something wrong with doing that.
yes.
But it goes back to innocence, whether they're stealing, whether they're
Yeah.
robbing, they don't think it's wrong.
Yeah. They
So
think it's okay.
It really comes down to why do we think it's wrong and what was our basis for thinking it's wrong?
It's wrong. Okay.
That's what we always have to drill down to, because if I have no basis, then it's just
Anything
opinion.
goes.
It's just
Yeah,
opinion.
It's your opinion.
Right? And then your opinion is really no greater than my
The
opinion.
opinion of the rapist.
You cannot say the rapist is wrong if anything
If there's
goes.
no- yeah.
If truth is relative, you can't say that horrible person did anything horrible. So they have to recognize that there has to be a standard and there has to be a basis for the standard. And that's usually where they drill down. I mean, Sam Harris's argument was the best I've ever seen presented and it got destroyed.
And then it's like, nope, doesn't work.
Well, Sam Harris is one of the new atheists, and he wrote a book called The Moral Landscape. And his idea that our moral choices all are part of human flourishing and the way it progresses through time, thinks it doesn't work because we have Hitler, Stalin, even Mother Teresa. I'm sure she's a wonderful person, but I would not want her version of human flourishing. She would be an equity person. So I mean, everybody, no matter how good they are, including me, cannot be the basis for,
Have a different version.
because I'm always going to choose what's beneficial to me.
Yeah.
It's human flourishing of me,
Yes.
not you, me.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Humans always pick their version
Yeah.
unless there's something transcendent. And that's the reason that you're having a transcendent standard. There must be a source. Because it
Yeah. Why
doesn't.
do you feel that way?
Yeah.
I remember Jordan Peterson said, just go ahead, forgive yourself. Why do you feel guilty? And it bothers you in the middle of the night. You wake up and it's like, oh man, I did something really horrible. Just forgive yourself.
Yeah, that's what Jordan Peterson, who is, and he makes the claim based on his years as a clinical psychologist that nobody ever gets
Nobody
away
gets
with
away with
anything.
anything.
It
Nobody.
haunts them.
It
And,
haunts them,
and I think that's,
even in this life, not like life to come, now. You keep lying to yourself, you cannot.
Takes its
He
toll.
will,
it
he
takes
will
its
hunt
toll
you.
on you.
Body, soul, and spirit.
We are designed a certain way, and when you violate that design, it's going to weigh on you.
It will weigh on you.
Yes, it will.
I'm thinking about that lady,
Sure.
the one who was raped and then there's no God, the one you just mentioned.
Right.
I'm thinking maybe in her mind, she have like a perspective of God. Somebody can protect
That's
her
true.
or
That's
help her
true,
when
that's true.
I think you're right, Sonny.
That's true.
And
They might be thinking, you have to explore that and see like, do they think like, what do you mean by God?
that's,
How do you define God? Like, so God, so for you to say that there is God, that this kid should be protected from those bad things that you described. Because if
that's
that's
actually, that's a really good
Yeah.
way, actually. I hadn't
Because
thought
if-
of that.
if it's like, there's no God because there's no protection for those innocent people. you can use it to abortion too.
Well-
It's like, okay, God didn't protect the baby, that there's no God.
But that's a good question, because effectively you get to the point where, look at the, God allows free choice, because without free choice, there's no love. And sometimes those free choices are not good for us.
Now, that's the thing that you can explore, like,
There's the
why do you think, like the concept of God in their mind?
Yeah.
So that's why they come to a conclusion that there's no God, because if he's around, he should have been protecting
Yeah,
this
no, that's
innocent
true.
people.
Because basically, they're not believing in a God that we don't believe in either. It's not who God
She was
is.
believing in God, but she didn't believe God was good.
Yeah,
That was the
probably.
thing.
So you have to explore that.
How do you know it's a good God?
What he thinks, what God means to her.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of drill down like, that God you
If
believe,
she
I don't believe
believes there's
either.
no God, then why would she blame him?
Well, I think that it's funny, because it's, how often do we say, oh, this is the proof that there's no God? Well, if you really believe there was no God, why are you talking about it?
Yeah.
Because then if it's irrelevant, then why do you make a big deal when you think you have an event that proves your point? Well, because you're trying to prove your point, because you haven't proven your point to
And then
yourself.
the same people,
So it's like, there is no God, but I'm so mad at him. Like,
Go ahead, Walter.
So most of the questions actually, I will say we want to extract the connection between the observed and the perceived.
yes.
So we have to know the connection. So why this connect to the God existence?
I think you're right. I think that's the idea of the questions, to try to dig down a little, to figure out what their perception is, so that you can address it with evidence, right? Because again, the whole idea is to try to help people to find the truth.
So I think with this question, then we can say like, so how can God exist? Like, what do you mean by, how do you define God? Like, what do you mean by a God?
That's
What is
true.
God
That's
to
what you
you?
need to find out.
What is
first.
God?
That'd be a really good path.
That you say that it doesn't exist because of the evil. Because typically, yeah, that they would think like, there's no God because no protection of the innocent people. Or there's bad things, like there's, he should stop that if he's a good God, if he's God. If he's a good God, then he should stop that.
Well, but
Right.
the whole thing is, they're blaming God for something that their worldview doesn't protect you from either. So they're blaming it as evidence that there's no God, yet their worldview says it's completely okay, and there isn't. If you're really a naturalist atheist, there is no right and wrong.
No.
And so I can't perceive anything as right and wrong, so I can't even see it as evidence against God, because I have no basis to make the judgment. So I mean, their argument actually goes in the circle. You have to have a God to say there is no God, because if there is no God, then I can't even say that this is evidence for anything, because there is no evidence for evil if there's not a standard. That's the reason you what do you mean by God? How do you define evil? And then see if you can't connect the two.
Yeah. Because those are different from different individual,
Yeah.
would have a different
yeah, it's sometimes,
perspectives.
yeah, sometimes it's like they say statements, but that's not really the root of the problem. It's
Yeah, they have
it's
something different,
else.
something else.
It's-
Well, we probably have an hour and a half more to this session, so I think we will, it's 3:30 already, so we're gonna call it a week, and let's come back, because I think there's great content in this session yet to be had. We'll walk through the rest of the conversation when we start next week, and if we have time, we'll watch the video. If not, we'll just kick it 1 week down the road, because I think learning how to address these questions, especially as a group, is the best exercise that
These
we
are a
can
lot
do.
harder than the first two lessons.
Yeah.
And they're going to get more complicated. He has a dialogue back and forth that we're going to go through next, in trying to see how you would maybe dialogue a little different to try to get a better outcome is something I think would be really useful for us to do. So we'll try to start there maybe
Yeah.
next week.
That's what we're struggling with. It's like,
Yeah.
Well, we're learning, because we've been taught so much that we need to
Yeah.
We need to give them the truth, and we're going to bloody their nose in doing so. Coco's approach is to take in what they're saying and do the Aikido thing. Step out of the way, use their momentum, and put it right back on them. What did you mean by that? What's your basis for that? And then make them to make claims that work in our favor so we can establish that truth leads here, not where you think it
I
does.
like this response. Why not?
Yeah, that's why I want my good friend in Lagrange to see this, because she's one of those people that she
I
just
think
goes,
I'm right.
I know, she just lets you have it.
Why
That's a
not?
good question. I remember that patient of mine that said, "Oh, why is this happening to you? Why God allowed this to happen to you?" And his answer is like, "Why not?" And the person that was talking to him can't say anything else.
Okay, so we're going to come back and we're going to
Because
look at
we
these
think
questions
we're
again
special.
when we start
We
next week.
shouldn't have it.
Because the second part of this, he actually goes through, she saw the beginning of it, what his answers would look like. And let's do it again, and then we'll finish out this series next week. Okay, let's go ahead and close with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for making opportunities for us to learn how we can guide people in finding the truth about you. Help us to stay out of these traps where we do become arrogant and intolerant, and instead show you through the way we speak, which hopefully is using questions to gain better understanding of where that person is, so we can put that stone in the shoe and allow you to work on them. We're always in search of truth. That's what Christianity is about, Lord, and we're so thankful for this opportunity to get together, and for my family here. Our friends and family are all one with you as we try to find ways to reach more and more people for you. And we pray these things in your name, Lord Jesus. Amen. Ever since I saw the tactics the first time around, I was like, man, this is something I need, because I can learn the arguments,
Yes.
but the presentation, character is a lifetime activity, but to find an application where your character flaws don't come out quite so.
Your strategy.
So you're strategically not allowing your bad character traits to work against you, right?
Right.
Because we all have the bad character traits. The key is don't let them be the driving force. And
That takes practice.
it
That's
takes
what.
a lot of practice.
Yeah, I got those questions, and some of them I engaged, and it was bad. There's nothing that went good.
Well, but
And the other one is like, I didn't say anything because it's like, she's very strong. She might just punch me. No, I was like, not literally, but she's a very strong person.
But
You know?
the whole idea is reflect on it and then practice what you would say. Well,
yeah.
what we've started doing as a family is we'll sit down and it's like, oh, what would we do different? And it helps. Yeah, it definitely helps.
No, I get all those questions because I'm the one that go out there, you know. I get the,
She's the only one engaged in the world, so.
I was like, oh, I got to answer this, like the abortion thing, that you shouldn't push your morality. I got those like, why leave them alone? They're doing their life. Well, why do you have to tell them about Christianity and all that stuff? Just leave them alone. They're doing okay.
Hold that one. That's a really good one. I think we should talk about next
Yeah.
week. That's a challenge that
I think-
is not on his list that we need to know how to address. It's
I
why are
think-
we
I
trying to
think
push
very good.
our religion on others?
Yes.
I mean, the answer is really simple. I love those other people. That's the reason I'm wanting to
I have a
share.
good news.
They still have a choice. They can choose to say no, but if I really have something so great, I have to
I
tell
have to
them.
tell them.
It's all about eternity when you're right now.
I would rather be disliked by somebody and trigger them. Yeah, and
No, I'd
then,
rather them dislike me today than them telling me, it's like, why did you not tell me?
What you tell me, you know,
You know.
you know better.
you know,
And why did
and
you
then
tell
you never
anything?
say anything.
It's a very like a medical. I want you to have informed choice. You still make a choice.
Yep.
I want to
But
keep you
when you,
informed.
yeah,
Yeah.
Agreed.
yeah.
That's right.
At least your choice is by
By the way, the Spanish girl that was telling me that.
But informed choice is a
I was
really
like, I
nice
don't
way of
think I
putting
did good.
evangelism.
I was
Because I can't force anybody to choose Jesus. I mean, if anybody says that, I can't force my religion on you. All I can do is allow you to be able to make an informed decision.
So just be honest, when I think about, I used to be in school, doing something like, evangelical event. We have 300 Chinese students at that time who have fellowship. So I'm thinking about what we have done. So the 2 years, so I became a president in the fellowship. So a lot of things happened. I see my fellowship is different because under my fellowship, there are 4 different churches. They fighting like each other. I don't know before I become the leadership. Because other church is one church is 7 fellowship. This is one fellowship with 7 church in school. So my point is, so this is the initial goal. We will try to converse. But now I think about that. So it's really like a medical, psychological. You treat it as a psychological subject. Of course, they treat you as also a psychological. It's like you see people insane, they see you insane. It's symmetric, you know what I mean? So the first thing you do in medical is actually diagnosis. This is a very difficult thing. Part of my job is actually only talk about diagnosis. The second step is treatment. We're rushing to treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're so right, Walter.
The diagnosis is just talk to them. Let them finish the questionnaire. You know what I
The
mean?
diagnosis first before you suggest an answer, a cure.
And also in medical, it's called subject specific. It's every patient is different.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's the reason why I was
Because
like,
there's so many moving
no, I'm
parts,
not.
right?
I'm not that. What you're saying, I don't have that problem. So why are you telling me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're not listening.
We're not listening.
Yeah.
And
You're getting the treatment without diagnosis.
well, and your example is so true. Churches fight against each other instead of,
I don't have problem.
should be focused on what unifies us instead of what separates us.
Oh, absolutely.
And then it's so competitive.
Absolutely.
And that's,
Actually, that's the one strategy I use. The reason they fight, I think that they have nothing to do because they don't see each other. That's why I began to try to, let them involve to the evangelical. They're actually very successful because they are seeing so many students, so many non-believers. They are very happy and
focus on the purpose instead
Otherwise,
of
they
the,
will try to,
They fight each other.
pull each other's, believer to different church.
They're fighting.
Now you have so many non-believers.
Yeah, you got plenty.
Jesus said, the harvest is plenty.
Well, it's sad.
The person that's already in the door.
Well, see, that's sad because even in Philippines we see that they're fighting about membership. There's so many people.
Yeah.
There's so many people that
If somebody moved to a different church, it's fine. They're fighting. It's like find the one that's like as long as they're still going to church, it's fine. But no, but the problem I think because like the building your own kingdom is part of that. Like I want to have a bigger denomination, more people. That means I'm successful and
Well, you're trying to build your
your
kingdom
kingdom
instead of God's kingdom.
God's kingdom.
I got in churches where we left quietly, never caused it. But then the pastor started talking about us like we'd done all this stuff. I mean, it's like, what? Stop saying a bunch of lies.
Well,
I don't understand that. It's
I don't get it.
I will get sad if they're not a Christian anymore. But if you just change church, no big deal. They're still going to church. No big deal.
You gotta listen to God.
Yeah.
I mean, God, there's
Anyways.
a time to go and there's a time to stay somewhere.
Yeah.
The Bible says God's church has no walls.
Yeah, that's one that always hurts me. We're in the house of God today. I have so many churches say that, the house of God is the person sitting there, not the building that you happen to be in. The house of God is the tabernacles right here.
Even the ecclesia, which translates as the church.
The church.
Ecclesia, that's a group of people. It's
the
not a
group, it's the
building.
assembly, not the building.
Well,
But people still think it's a building.
Yeah.
mhm.
Well, they think worship is singing now instead of, worship is a little more than just singing. Singing's okay, but it's not the only thing.
It's one form.
It's one form. It's not the only way to worship.
No.
But nowadays in our churches, worship is just singing. That's what they peddle. And I think that's unfortunate. We don't teach people that there's other.
Whole life is.
Your whole life is
Yes,
Yeah.
you're supposed to worship continually, right? With everything you do. Singing.
I meditate on that sometimes. God, what part of my mind, your whole heart, your whole mind. your whole
That's the reason why I don't watch those kind of movies that stays in my mind and it bothers me. I don't watch those because even at sleep, it stays in my mind. It's like, no, it's garbage. I don't want to watch it.
It's better to put something good in your brain
I
before
quit
bed.
watching those things because it stays so long in my mind. It's like, oh, I don't want to watch those.
This is one of the things, I just feel like the Holy Spirit wants to remind us when we're talking to unbelievers to be patient, you know, because the scriptures say their minds are blinded. There's a veil. Their minds are blinded. So I know we can get like, why can't they see this? You know, it's like, seems so obvious, but
It's like,
they can't see it. So if we know we're going to be engaging someone kind of on a regular basis, pray. I mean,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
prayer.
I
is
have-
the key.
I have several coworkers that
my general,
I
I'm
can
always
engage
like,
and
I've been on that shoes that it's like now I say duh, but I was before it's like I don't get this. What does this
You have to prayerfully prepare.
So it's like
So that God
I gotta
will-
understand when the other party doesn't get it. Because it's like I've been on that shoes. I
Well,
don't get it.
I think this whole approach is trying to dial in and figure out where their stumbling block is. What is the veil that's, and what's the
what is the
barrier?
problem?
And then
Why are they
let's
blinded? Yeah.
put a couple of imperfections in that veil and see whether that person is willing to see truth or whether they believe in the veil too much. Yeah, chisel on it a little bit and put that rock in there and
There you go.
Like what's this principle? A pebble in the shoe.
Sometimes you just got one shot at it, but like with you might have a lot of shots.
Yeah, I got a lot of shots. I see them every time I go there.
well, not just, but the one time and done, we shouldn't be scared of that. If we can make one chisel in the wall, the next person another chisel in the wall, and maybe 10 people down the road, that's it. But if we don't start it, it might never start. So we
No,
shouldn't.
I've seen, for me, I have so many like situation where I could have, but I was not prepared. I'm scared. I'm like,
That's what
so
we're learning.
hopefully this would like make me brave enough to like,
Well,
you know.
This approach is very non-threatening. And then if they step through the first door, then the door's open, then you
Yeah.
can go. And we'll see. Yeah, I don't have a lot of opportunity to practice this,
I
unfortunately.
don't either.
I can vicariously learn through her.
Yeah, I get those quite a bit.
Our home have at least two.
But I feel like I'm like more aggressive, like
Your mom and dad. When we talk about our belief, then I will regret. Oh, I should use that.
well, maybe we should
Like
But next
after
time.
the fact. Yeah, the fact.
That's where you got to reflect.
Yeah.
Reflect, practice, and then reapply.
Yeah. And when we were driving here, I asked him, "Did you use those two questions?" He said no. I said, "Yeah, no, I didn't use it." I know.
No, but I think this is fun, but we're going to slow it down a little bit, make sure we follow all the examples because I think it's you lose the value out of it if you don't actually do the role play.
Yeah.